As the hills draw nearer, one heeds their wooded sides more than their stone-crowned tops. Those sides loom up so darkly and precipitously that one wishes they would keep their distance. But there is no road by which to escape them. Across a covered bridge one sees a small village, huddled between the stream and the vertical slope of Round Mountain, and wonders at the cluster of rotting gambrel roofs, bespeaking an earlier architectural period than that of the neighboring region. It is not reassuring to see, on a closer glance, that most of the houses are deserted and falling to ruin, and that the broken steepled church now harbors the one slovenly mercantile establishment of the hamlet. One dreads to trust the tenebrious tunnel of the bridge, yet there is no way to avoid it. Once across, it is hard to prevent the impression of a faint malign odor about the village street, as of the massed mold and decay of centuries. It is always a great relief to get clear of the place, and to follow the narrow road around the base of the hills, and across the level country beyond, till it rejoins the Aylesbury Pike. Afterward, one sometimes learns that one has been through Dunwich. That is from The Dunwich Horror by H.P. Lovecraft. Your Mythos Monday for today. Welcome, my friends, once again to stately Vaughan Manor. And welcome once again to your Mythos Monday. So today we are going to be talking about The Dunwich Horror, one of H.P. Lovecraft's creepiest stories. It was made into a couple of really bad movies. Best to forget those films, and we'll just concentrate on the story itself. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the story, a little bit of the beginning. I don't want to give away too much, because this is actually a really good story. It's another one of H.P. Lovecraft's stories that has all the plot and complexity of a novel, but he basically compresses that all into one story. It's a long story. It's a bit of a novelette, this one. But it has a great pace, and it uses its length to its advantage. And so much of H.P. Lovecraft's style is so finely honed at this point in his career that the language and the style of writing just adds so much richness to this story. It is an immensely creepy story. So it all takes place in and around Dunwich, which is in central Massachusetts. And it focuses early in the earlier portions of the story on a creepy family that live outside Dunwich at an old farmhouse. And the family is presided over by old Wizard Whately, his daughter Lavinia, and her son Wilbur. Wilbur Whately becomes the focus of a large part of the story, and he is just an incredibly creepy character. He is educated by his grandfather, Wizard Whately, and wouldn't you know it, Wizard Whately just happens to be an actual wizard. Unfortunately for us, because he is trying to contact cosmic forces. And this is one of the main stories where we hear a lot of Yog-Sothoth, which is a being, a cosmic entity, which we never learn a heck of a lot about. We hear of him in a few stories. I believe the first story is I can't remember the first story where Yog-Sothoth first pops up. But he's in a few stories, Yog-Sothoth, and he is the main cosmic entity that old Wizard Whately is trying to get a hold of. He is trying to, well, I better not say what he's trying to do. You'll find out in the story. But he is not able to accomplish it himself, old Wizard Whately. He passes away before he can do it. and so it's up to Wilbur to do whatever evil, vile thing that they want to do. So old Wizard Whately dies. Lavinia, Wilbur's mother, mysteriously vanishes. Um, of course, it's highly likely that Wilbur had something to do with her disappearance. So Wilbur is just a creepy character. There's something inhuman about him, and we never learn who his father is in the beginning of the story. We learn later, though, and he's just this creepy, otherworldly kind of guy. First of all, he grows up really quickly. There's this one sentence in here which kind of sums it up. Something's going on at this farmhouse. Young Wilbur and his grandfather are working on the farmhouse, and here's this creepy little paragraph here. About 1923, when Wilbur was a boy of 10, whose mind, voice, and stature and bearded face gave all the impressions of maturity, a second great siege of carpentry went on at the old house. It was all inside the sealed upper part, and from bits of discarded lumber people concluded that the youth and his grandfather had knocked out all the partitions and even removed the attic floor, leaving only one vast open void between the ground story and the peaked roof. So they're basically hollowing out the inside of this house. Eventually, the townspeople figure out that Wilbur, once his grandfather is gone, has hollowed out the entire inside of the house. Why? Well, we don't know. So Wilbur has taken after his creepy grandfather and has all these creepy spell books. And one of his creepy books is the dreaded Necronomicon. The Necronomicon plays a big part in this story. So Wilbur Whately is trying to do whatever it is that creepy Whateleys want to do, and for him to accomplish his goal, he needs a more perfect copy of the Necronomicon than the one he's got. He's got a substandard copy of the Necronomicon, so he needs to get the real deal. So he has to go to Miskatonic University, and he's going to try to get their copy of the Necronomicon because he knows they've got one. And at this university is Professor Henry Armitage, who becomes pretty central in the story. So Wilbur goes to Miskatonic University, tries to borrow the book, but they don't let him have it because you just can't let any creepy guy have the Necronomicon. No way, it's too dangerous. So he tries to steal it later that night, and he ends up, well, I won't tell you what happens, but something kind of terrible happens, and we learn the true nature of Wilbur Whately. And a little later on, something really terrible happens in Dunwich, because Wilbur's story is just the preface of the actual Dunwich horror, which happens later on in the story. Eventually, the township of Dunwich is besieged by an invisible, gigantic entity. And Henry Armitage, who has figured out what Wilbur and his grandfather were up to, has to gather some colleagues and go fight this horror that has assailed Dunwich. It is actually a really complex and interesting story. It's got kind of a mixed reception. Most people seem to like it, and for some people, the Dunwich Horror is their favorite story. But it's an interesting, almost kind of a throwback story for H.P. Lovecraft, because at this period of his career, he was moving more into science fiction-y type of stories. there is a lot of the trappings of the supernatural in the Dunwich horror. We've got wizards and spells, and the Necronomicon is basically a way to call down cosmic horrors. It's an interesting story because it mixes up cosmic horror with kind of a more traditional supernatural story. And it takes a lot of influence from Arthur Menken's The Great God Pan and a few other things. But H.P. Lovecraft takes those influences, and as H.P. Lovecraft does, he really makes it his own. The Dunwich Horror is really his own thing. And it's a really well-crafted story. Really, really scary at times. The ending is a bit problematic. I won't say what happens at the ending. There are a couple points towards the end of the story where a couple things seem, to me at least, a bit more ridiculous than frightening. But that could just be me. There are a couple things that happen at the end of the Dunwich Horror, and if you've read this story and you know what I'm talking about, let me know if you felt the same or differently, or let me know if you think this story worked for you. Let me know just what you think about this story, because like I said, there are a lot of different opinions on this one. Like I said, some people think it's like his greatest story. Some people think, it's just all right. I fall somewhere in the middle. There's a lot of stuff that works in the story really, really well. All the stuff with Wilbur Whately, his grandfather, the weird stuff that's happening in the central part of the story, I think works really, really well. I do think it kind of falls apart at the end. I'm not sure that the kind of combination of science fiction and supernatural horror really works in this. And after this, you do see H.P. Lovecraft going to more straight science fiction as the horror theme in his stories. So I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I like this story. I don't think it's his greatest Cthulhu mythos. I do think it's pretty good, though, and it's certainly well worth reading. The next story that we're going to be talking about is going to be The Whisperer in the Darkness, which we're going to be talking about next week. That is one of my very, very favorite stories. And I think it works much better because that one, which comes, after this one, really focuses on the science fiction, and the science fiction is the basis of the horror. This one, the Dunwich Horror, still relies on at least the trappings of the supernatural. So it's an interesting story, and I do recommend you read it, of course. It is among his best from the period where he was writing his best stories. There are really just a couple of things that I think are problematical, and that's it. But I do recommend it, and if you've read it, I'm really interested in what you might have thought about it. So that is our Mythos Monday for today, the Dunwich Horror. I just gave you a bit because I do want you to read this story. I do want you to read it and experience it for yourself, get your own unsullied impression, and yeah, make up your own mind about it. And then next week, we've got The Whisperer in Darkness, which is just a fantastic story, and I really look forward to talking about that one. And tomorrow's Tuesday. I think I've got a tag for tomorrow. That'll be fun. And then I've got a couple more things coming up later this week. So thank you for joining me once again at Stately Vaughan Manor, and I will catch you next time. Thanks, guys.